Rokar has fallen. In its place, monsters and twisted spirits now thrive. Rise up, champion. Stop this madness. Rise again.
Hello, and thank you so much. Hello, everybody at VRTO. We are so excited to be here today. Today, we will be talking about story stacks and game pillars, the champions of Until You Fall's game design. I have the distinct pleasure of having Jesse Schell and Dave Bennett on the panel with me, and we are going to dive in. But before we do that, would you take a moment to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. I'm Jesse Schell, the CEO of Schell Games, and I don't know. I like VR.
I'm Dave Bennett, senior game designer at Schell Games, and I was the project director for Until You Fall. And so that's kind of a blend between creative director and project manager. I like to describe it as the guy that does everything and nothing for the project. So yeah, I've basically had my hands in many parts of the entire game.
That's awesome. So let's dive right on in. So how did the idea of Until You Fall come about?
Oh, that's a good question. So we'd been doing VR for a while at Schell Games. We got started in, I don't know, 2014, 2015. And we'd done I Expect You to Die, which had done really well for us. You know, it's our escape room game. And while we loved it, we were really excited about it. One of the things we know is a game like that is hard to make. Like, those levels take a long time to make. And once you've made them, they just kind of are what they are. And so we kept wondering, could we make a game that was maybe a little more systems oriented, that was a little more replayable? Because as a puzzle game, it wasn't very replayable. So that had been on our minds. And then we'd done some work on the Jedi Challenges. And Dave, you'd worked on that some.
Yeah, I've done a little work on that. And I know we'd come up with a combat system that we were really excited to kind of explore further.
Can you describe what Jedi Challenges was?
Yeah, Jedi Challenges is an AR experience where you basically duel basically all sorts of baddies from the Star Wars universe with a lightsaber. And so you have a prop lightsaber, and you are using your phone, and I believe the headset's called the Mirage, where you actually basically go toe-to-toe and have choreographed duels with these characters. And so a series of choreographed blocks and attacks, and it just felt really cool. And there's basically the bones of that system felt so powerful that we thought there's like, okay, well, there are other ways to kind of expand this and kind of take that and take it further, because this feels really good. Like, what else can we do, and how else can we expand this?
Yeah, and so we started really having faith and confidence in like, hey, wow, this sword fighting is feeling really good. And like I'd worked on some sword fighting stuff 1,000 years ago. Well, not really. I've been working on VR for maybe 30 years, and I'd worked on something back in the 90s for Disney Quest. I'd had, I'd been kind of got to see the Ride the Comics experience, which was Disney's sword-based VR experience. And like, so like I kind of knew the power of swords from that. And of course, I'd done a lot of work at the Entertainment Technology Center. And over the years, lots of students had made different sword-based VR experiences. So we knew there was power there. Yeah, and after we'd done Jedi Challenges, the idea of like, ooh, what if we did two-handed sword combat? Like, hey, maybe that really could be something.
Yeah, two weapons plus movement in VR was kind of the thing. Is like, okay, well, how do we, in addition to kind of all the systems-based stuff that we wanted to kind of explore, how do we make a game that is more action-based while still not making you sick and still like basically keeping the kind of accessibility goals that we had set out with I Expect You to Die, like anyone can play this game, it's great. How do we actually kind of bring this forward and, you know, let people become a cool sword guy or gal, and, you know, just hit monsters with swords.
Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow. So, I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but, you know, Schell Games, you run the gamut from, you know, something like Water Bears to I Expect You to Die to Until You Fall. Like, how do you become comfortable, like, hopping across genres and, you know, game types?
What do you say, Dave?
Never comfortable. No, no. Honestly, I think that's one of the biggest strengths we have is that because we work on so many different things, we're able to pull from those, at the time, seemingly disparate experiences and be able to use that to inform, I don't know, things that you'd never expect. Like, I mean, even some players have compared Until You Fall's combat system a little bit to Infinity Blade, and that's an iOS game and tablet game, and some of our experience working on tablet games, God, 8 years ago or whatever, kind of pulled into that and kind of like helped inform, like, okay, well, let's look at those types of experiences that either we have made or that other studios have made, and you kind of pull in all of those ideas and basically concepts and see how they can kind of apply here. And for, you know, a more direct comparison is probably like, again, I Expect You to Die, where it's like we learned a lot of really good lessons about how to make good, solid VR there, and we're able to kind of carry that forward. But again, like the wild variety of stuff that we build ultimately just kind of helps make stronger products in really subtle ways.
Yeah, and I mean, and for me, I just like working on a lot of stuff. If I have to work on the same stuff all the time, I get a little itchy. And so being able to move from, you know, hey, we're working on a sword game to an escape room game to a game for preschool children to a health game to a theme park experience, like I that jumping around like that, it's super fun, and it helps us. We get a lot of new ideas because we're like, what if we took this thing from over here but put this with it, and that gets you a new idea. So it helps with invention when you work on a lot of different things.
Yeah, I think a lot of the again, like the location-based experience stuff that we do also turned out to be really applicable because especially early on when working in VR, it's like, oh, it turns out a lot of the same kind of principles and guidelines you use for making good attractions or spaces or location-based experiences are applicable here because you were in a virtual space that is supposed to feel real and comfortable and and all sorts of things like that. Even like the OSHA guidelines were used a little bit as kind of like, oh, I guess we'll use this as a starting point. That was interesting.
Oh, that's awesome. So let's talk about some of the brass tacks. What engine is Until You Fall built on? Did you make your own engine, Unity, Unreal?
We have a bunch of wizards that are masters of Unity. So it is based off of Unity with our own kind of custom rendering. Ryan Hipple and Joe Pasek are wizards of both shaders and Unity backend stuff. It's pretty cool. It's the kind of thing. It's like, wow, this stuff's really good. How do you do that? Dogs love it.
Yeah, that's right. No, I mean we've been using Unity for years and years, and like you can make it do incredible things if you know what you're doing.
Pardon my dog barking in the background, but we're going to dive into story stacks and game pillars. That's a huge part of Until You Fall's process. Can you tell us more about that?
Dave, do you want to start talking about the pillars for Until You Fall and actually what pillars are?
Yeah, sure. So at a 1,000-foot view, pillars are a tool we use at the studio to kind of really hone in on what's important about the core experience of the game. And they're used as both kind of a guidepost or foundation or pillars to help the development team remember what's important and what's core to the game. So these can be both used for basically like what is the player supposed to feel or what is the development team supposed to remember. So for Until You Fall, the most important pillar was become a sword god. And so the idea here is that, in Until You Fall, early on, we knew that this made the actions that you're performing feel good and you can quickly feel awesome. And so it was really important for me to kind of get the team on board with the idea that like, no, this is not a game where you start as a zero and become a hero. You start as a hero and you become a literal sword deity. Like you are amazingly powerful and you become even stronger as you continue playing this game. And so that kind of helps get across the idea of the bombast and the strength and just the relative, again, this power of the player compared to this world. Other pillars include, oh boy, here we go, pop quiz time. In the second pillar is power through persistence, where the idea here is, as a roguelite, we wanted this game to be something where you continue trying and getting stronger and getting better, not only mechanically, but also, you get power-ups and get stronger over time. So not only you're learning the game systems, but you're getting kind of a helping hand from the game mechanics. And then the last one is supercharged VR interactions. And so this one seems pretty, self-explanatory. It's a VR game. We want to make sure that it takes advantage of the medium and feels as awesome as it can in the platform. So everything we're doing should be pushing towards those ideals. And so, yeah, in general, with gameplay pillars, we try to shoot for 2 to 3 because we find that any more than that tends to just muddy the waters in terms of what's actually important for the game. But those 3 pillars were ones we set up pretty early, and they stayed consistent throughout the development. And I found them super helpful. And again, they're kind of, I feel like you can definitely see kind of the echoes of those statements throughout the experience.
Cool. Yeah. No. And in terms of the story stack's a structure that we use in order to figure out the right way to kind of blend story elements into a game. And it was something actually that we developed. We'd worked a little bit. Jason Vandenberg was a consultant on the game because he'd worked on sword games like Red Steel, and we brought him in for some consultation. And early on, he was like, "You guys, you have too much story going on too early in your process." And as we started to chat about it, we kind of developed this vision of like, oh, here's probably the right way to bring story in there. I can do a quick screen share, I think. Oh, if you can enable screen sharing, I could do some of that. But the idea is that when you bring story into your game, you want to do it thoughtfully and carefully, and that the important way to do it is to start with what is the fantasy of this game, and not start with a bunch of lore and a bunch of backstory and a bunch of events. So here, I'll show you I think I'm doing a little screen share right there. You guys getting that?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So you can see right there, the story stack. This is the model that we use. The idea being that these 5 things are really important. You need story, world, economy, action, and fantasy in your story. In your game, I mean, and the ones at the bottom are most flexible. The ones at the top are, the ones at the bottom are least flexible. The ones at the top are most flexible. We have to write this stuff down because it can be hard to kind of get it straight in your head sometimes. And it sounds a little crazy to say that maybe fantasy is not flexible, but it's not. There are fantasies you have, fantasies you don't have. And if you get the wrong fantasy at the core of your game, no one's interested in it. You might have a game about, oh, I want to be a master chef. Well, yeah, that's a strong fantasy. Lots of people have that. But I want to be a sad dishwasher. Well, not very many people have that fantasy. You're going to have a harder time making an engaging game about being a sad dishwasher. So focusing on this feeling of like, yeah, I want to be not just somebody who fights with swords, but I want to be this sort of super powerful sword god. That was kind of the core of our fantasy. And then you build your way up. Then you say, well, what are the actions that I need to have in order to feel that? And then economy is really about progress. How do I get progress in my game that makes me feel like I'm moving more and more and more into this fantasy? And then what's a world that makes sense for me to have those kinds of powers? And then what are story events that kind of would justify me having those powers in this world? And that was how we ended up developing the world of Rokar. Because the world of Rokar is, the story is a little, it's got some kind of weird qualities to it with these, these knights who had fallen, and we needed reasons for these boss monsters. And it all comes out of that. We needed a reason for you to start out with nothing and build up towards more and more weapons. And we needed reasons that all these guys were out to get you, and why this world was sort of fallen and ruined.
Yeah, and I think another point that I think you'd already kind of made, but like anything you change lower on the stack tends to need to reevaluate everything above it. So
Yes.
it's kind of the idea is like, okay, if I end up having to change the fantasy, now I need okay, did the mechanics still make sense? Does the world still make sense? The economy still make sense? Does the story still make sense? And I found, especially after Until You Fall, like I found it very useful as a tool to be like, okay, well, these things are, we can kind of play with these different things and seeing how they fit together. But anytime, again, the general rule of thumb, anything at the bottom of the stack that you change needs to then cascade up. And so that's kind of where the flexibility comes in. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because that's the wonderful thing about story. You can change story all over the place. And in fact, story is often used to justify the mechanics and the progress that feels good in your game. Now you just need a reason to justify why is it that way. And story is great at justifying things.
Oh, that's incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for that. So let's talk about lenses. Go into the art of game design. Did you consider any or all of the lenses that were discussed in that book?
Oh
I'm
boy,
contractually obligated to say yes. No.
we're always talking about the lenses, right? The lenses, for people who don't know the art of game design book of lenses, which I have right here. There you go.
Oh, nice.
This is what the book looks like. The idea of the lenses is they're just questions that you should ask yourself about the game. And I think there are a number of them that came up when we were working on it. I don't know. Are there ones that jump to mind for you, Dave?
I'm trying to think. I think affordance especially was one of them. I'm trying to remember one that you basically put on my desk with a dagger in it.
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, yeah. What? There was something that we were really not getting right. And
it was probably the Aether Bloom, that damn bloom at the end of the level.
It was something about, I can't remember what that was. There was something about that, and it was like, we really need to get that right. And I don't know, it was feedback. I don't know.
I think it might have been feedback, because again, I think the issue we were having was understanding that these are good things. Like, because originally it was unclear. It's like, do I need to approach this thing? How do I act? Like, Patrick and I gave a whole other talk for GDC at one point about like the travails of the Aether Bloom. But I think it was something involving like the feedback and making sure the players understood this was a good thing, and that these. I know you were definitely hammering the point that like these rewards should look juicy and like delicious and like fruits almost.
Yeah.
So it's just like making sure that the player understood that these are good things coming out and that you should want them. I'm not sure remember which lens it was.
Yeah, the lens of Primality was there we
go.
In there. Yeah, the idea that there are certain things that are really primal to people, that like you see it, and mostly we don't recognize to the extent that we use these primal things. Like the reason stop signs are red, right? They're red because blood is red. And we are wired that when we see blood, when we see that red color, like we pay a lot of attention because there's something really dangerous and worth paying attention to. Or the reason that caution tape is like that black and yellow stripe, you'll notice that's the same kind of black and yellow that are on poisonous insects. So there are these things that are really primal. And so those are some examples of kind of warnings and negative things, but other examples like are the idea of fruit, right? Fruit is something that's it's really important for survival, and fruit has a certain look and a certain feel and a certain quality. And we use it in video games all the time. Like candy is pretending to be fruit. And that's why you have games like Candy Crush, right? Where like things are like have those kind of same fruit colors and things. And so in this game, when we wanted to give the treasures and we wanted to kind of make it clear that they were things that you'd want to get, the idea of them kind of almost, they come out and they kind of dangle almost like fruit off of a tree, and then you like pick it up in your hand, right? And then of course we switch from like this, like, oh, it's this fruit thing, to now you're going to crush it in your hand, which makes you feel really powerful, because back to, our fantasy is not, oh, I'm going to eat a lot of fruit. The fantasy is I'm going to be a sword god, and to be able to kind of I crush this and then I absorb the power. The team took all that really seriously, and I feel like we got a lot of that right.
Yeah, and I think even when we knew we got it right when we were doing playtests and taking it to conferences, and we were seeing players. The two things we saw players do when they first got the rewards was either try to take a bite out of it, because it would look delicious, or they would do the He-Man I have the power pose to crush it and feel super powerful. Yeah, I mean, like the two interactions in this game you really have are hit things and not be hit, as well as crush. Like those are kind of your verbs of like interacting with this world.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, and you nailed it, because I definitely feel like a sword goddess every time I boot up that game. So well done. So let's talk about what you know now versus when VR, was just on the horizon. When you were making Water Bears VR, for example, what's a key lesson learned from that experience or other experiences that rolled into Until You Fall?
Oh man, I think some of the stuff that we learned early on had to do with locomotion and taking that really seriously. We had done sort of I Expect You to Die. We had done some early stuff experimenting with locomotion, and we just kept staring at getting locomotion right is really hard. So our early games really avoided it. And we knew going into Until You Fall, it needed locomotion. I tried 20 ways to kind of get the team to push locomotion out of there, and they kept pushing back, saying, this doesn't work. You can't have meaningful sword fights and stand still. It just doesn't. It becomes boring. It doesn't really work. And so there was a lot of pressure to okay, if we're going to get locomotion, let's get it right. And I mean, for me, a huge lesson learned. So we use this vignetting system, right? Which I'd first seen that in Eagle's Flight, where it's where you'd fly around, and when you're moving fast, they would kind of vignette in, and you wouldn't see the edges. And that's important because it's the edges of your vision that communicate motion. And if that motion doesn't line up with what you're feeling balance-wise in your head, that's when you get sick, because your body thinks it's being poisoned. And so early games kind of took that away. Some people had figured out, well, actually you can do better than taking it away. You can provide a grid in there, and that gives your brain something to lock onto. And that's what we started doing. We started having that sort of spatial grid in there. But when I had first seen those, when I'd first seen those grid vignetting experiments, I'm like, okay, that's cute, but it's so distracting and it's so annoying. No one's going to ever want that in a game ever. But it all has to do with where your head is when you're playing. So this mode works really well for Until You Fall, because it's a game about hunting and being hunted. Because when you're hunting and when you're being hunted, you're trying to go somewhere and you're focused, and your brain is literally doing a kind of tunnel vision, because you're just oh, I got to get to the next thing. I got to get to the next thing. I got to get to the next thing. And then we take the vignette away when you're there to fight the guy, because you're not moving. You don't need it. And it works fine because you're so intent on where am I going. If this was instead a game of I'm going to wander around and smell the flowers, or where's the hidden treasure? The vignetting is terrible, because it's really annoying, because it blocks out what you want to see. But it works great in our game. So I know that was a huge lesson learned as we moved into Until You Fall.
Yeah, I think that was definitely the biggest one. I think all the grid, the actual vignetting, the addition of the false horizon line was also a big kind of win for us for that fighting motion sickness, because again, it kind of gives you that false sense of stability, because again, the grid is stationary, the horizon line is stationary, even though your kind of center play area is moving and kind of frenetic.
You're basically hacking the motion, the brain's vision system. Yeah.
Yep. And I'm trying to think of another example. I think also just the sense of presence you get in VR, I think is something we continue to carry forward.
Oh yeah.
Each experience, because I think Water Bears, you're getting up close to these little cute characters. I Expect You to Die, we're kind of getting into your personal space a little bit. Until You Fall was kind of kind of the most extreme example of this, because again, there's a dude with a sword swinging at you, and that watching it on a screen versus being in a headset and seeing the guy lunging at you triggers all sorts of just crazy fight or flight responses that you're just totally not ready for. And really just kind of figuring out what the line is to cross, and how close can we really get that is still comfortable, that while still being effective, that kind of thing. Because I think setting up the initial fights, one of the early things that our design director Patrick was really adamant on was making sure that the enemies didn't clip into you and really break that sense of immersion or make you sick, because that was a big thing that was causing a lot of discomfort early, was this idea that like, okay, an enemy would lunge into you and now you're in his face, and it would just, either you would get sick or it would just take you out of the experience, or both. And so there's a lot of basically just careful work that went into that I think we kind of used our previous experience to draw on.
Yeah, no, that trying to get that sense of the physical presence of the enemies there was really important for us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other part too was the sense of scale and making sure that the player felt like they're the right size. I know for I Expect You to Die, like you can play standard or seated mode, so that's something we wanted to kind of bring forward into our game, and something that we did to kind of like make sure that you always felt like a cool sword person was make sure that you're at a consistent height. Because again, if you're a young kid and you're like 4 feet tall and everyone's a huge giant, the game falls apart. And so we actually calibrate you to make everyone consistently, like I think 5'11" or 6 foot nothing. And then that way everything feels scaled appropriately. You feel like a cool sword person and you're able to kind of walk into these environments and have everything feel the way we intend to.
That's awesome. Thank you. So we do have some questions from the VRTO community that did come in. Would you consider Until You Fall to be a rhythm or fitness game?
Yes. So there's an asterisk there because we didn't set out to make one of those necessarily. But for rhythm, we've kind of jokingly referred to it as a rhythm light, because music was a huge part of kind of like giving that feeling of progression and pushing you forward and making you feel powerful and like wanting to get into the fight. Because again, this is a game where you're supposed to feel powerful. And the way you feel powerful is by hitting dudes, and you need to hit dudes by feeling like you have to be pushed into combat. And so this is something where it's like, okay, we want to choose a soundtrack that really drives you forward, which is kind of what led to the synthwave and the Neon Knights and that whole crazy set of decisions. But even though it's not actually even though the combat is not driven by the music, a lot of, again, kind of the subtle things that we do to kind of encourage you to fight are the way we change music. So like when you're starting the fight, before you even get into the fight, it's kind of more calm, it's kind of preparatory, it's like preparing for violence. And then once you're actually in the fight, the music kicks up and gets into a higher tempo and BPM, and then you're really in it and you're feeling frenetic. And when you're doing really well, or when you're pushing into like kind of like the latter half of the fight, the music escalates. When you're dying, it slows down a little bit to let you focus. And people have told me at conferences like, oh man, I can't believe the music is driving the combat. And it's like, yeah, totally. Thanks. And it's one of those things where like we wanted to do it as a kind of, again, part of making you feel powerful, but we didn't want to have the fighting be restricted to be like a pure rhythm game. So we kind of like split the difference and kind of found this happy medium.
Yeah, there were times we were seriously talking about what if it was really about doing the combat on the beat. But it did feel restrictive, and so we kind of stepped away from that for a while. I was calling it Project Slashdance. That was a working title for a short time. Didn't quite stick. But in terms of a fitness game, it definitely falls in the zone of fitness game because of the amount of motion. With both big arm movements, the big swings that you have to do frequently, combined with the ducking. Ends up being a really good workout, especially for people who are newer at the game. Like it ends up being a really meaningful workout.
Yeah, and I mean, thanks to the power of VR managing to trick you into not knowing how much you're actually working out. Like you're so focused on the game. It's like, oh man, I'm really tired. Why am I slowing down? And it's the realization is like, oh, actually, yeah, no, you're physically getting tired. We actually had to add warnings into the game or reminders. It's like, hey, maybe take a break once in a while.
Yeah.
You're probably getting tired. Don't forget to drink water. Yeah. So yeah, again, it wasn't our intent, but it totally worked out that way.
And I would say in terms of like a big VR lesson learned, one thing we talk about a lot is a lot of people think about VR as a technology for the eyes, but we tend to think about it as a technology for the body because it brings your body into a simulation. That's what's unique about VR, is that it involves your body. And so that's Until You Fall was very much designed around that. Like if my body's going to be in here, how can we make full use of of that, and really make, back to the fantasy. The fantasy is being a sword god. Well, what does a sword god's body do? Like, what are the things what are the poses and things that are going to make you feel that way? And then we designed the gameplay to get you to make those poses. And so, because the way you position your body changes how you feel about a thing. So that was very intentional.
Yeah, Patrick very clearly in one of the other talks we did, our design director Patrick had just made the clear distinction of like, hey, we should make the fun way to play the best way to play. And part of like, not only mechanically, but also like you're getting at, Jesse, with like, yeah, okay, you're striking these heroic poses, you're taking these stances that not only feel cool, but in some cases actually like make you look cool while playing too. So like people from the outside see you striking these poses, and it approximates sword fighting to the point where it's like, okay, it's not just someone just standing there wiggling the sword around. They're actually taking these big heroic stands and dodging out of the way of attacks, blocking, swinging, and turns out making those big motions, great for fitness.
Yeah.
And co-sign on that. I have lost 3 pounds playing Until You Fall. So thank you for making exercising a lot more fun than it should be. All right. So another question from the community. What's one piece of advice you'd give yourselves at the beginning of Until You Fall's development?
Oh man, I'd say the story stack. Oh my God.
Probably.
At the beginning, we got a little lost in story and lore and background and trying to build a world that was sort of based on that. Also, I think the big one for us was the quest.
Sure.
When we started, the quest wasn't out. We weren't sure what was going to be up with the quest. And so we were very focused on making this as a PC game. And as we started working through it, it became clear that the quest was important and that we were going to have to take the game there, and porting the game to the quest was a challenge, definitely. And so if we'd known going in that was important, I think we would have made some choices differently.
Yeah, I think the another thing too is if probably committing to early access, or if we knew we were going to do early access, doing it sooner and coming up with the plan. Because I think what we did in early access was really helpful for getting feedback from the players and understanding what works and what didn't work, and we were able to make some really good changes based off the community feedback and do some early community building with that. So I found that really helpful, and I definitely wish we had known that we were going to do it sooner than we did necessarily. But I'm glad, like I'm still happy with how it all worked out. But early access is great, especially for these type of games.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I think that has provided everybody with a great behind the scenes view of Until You Fall's development design process. If you haven't already, head over to untilyoufall.com to learn more about the game. We have some great articles there. You can snag a copy if you haven't already and get your neon sword fighting fitness on. Is there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with the VRTO community, and how can they keep in touch with you? What are your social handles?
I know I'm easy to find. I'm at Jesse Schell on Twitter is easy, or you can go to jesseschell.com and find all kinds of stuff. How about you, Dave?
On Twitter, you can find me at Dave B. Bennett. You can also go to my website, davebennett.games. And you can just follow and see what I've worked on there, and just, I don't know, watch me post stupid trash on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for your time. For the VRTO community, we hope you've enjoyed this panel, and please enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care and be safe out there.
Take care, everyone.